to the Thought Snob Podcast. I'm Paula Swope. Let's get snobby. Welcome to another episode of the Thought Snob Podcast. I'm your host, Paula Swope, and I'm here with my husband, Will, who produces this podcast. And if you've been watching us for any amount of time, you know that we switched up the format a few weeks ago. And I still have guests on occasion, but 90% of the time, it's going to be these short commentary episodes where Will gives me a topic and I don't really know what it is until he gives me the topic, and then I pretty much talk about it off the top of my head. So let's see what he's got for me today.
Here lately, I've been hearing you talk a lot about people being out of alignment and how you can actually tell that people are out of alignment. So I'd like to know exactly how you're able to do that. I understand that it's something you're able to do, but I don't quite understand how.
They use 3 words: bored, lonely, and can't. And when I hear somebody use those 3 words, I know they're out of alignment. And what I mean by being out of alignment is you are not doing what you're supposed to be doing. You are disconnected from your source. You are not in touch with your higher self. And if anybody thinks that when I use that type of language that I'm speaking woo-woo, well, you've really got another thing coming. You do have a higher self, and you are connected to God. I mean, whether you believe in God or you don't, I absolutely do wholeheartedly. This is just a fact. And I understand, my mother used to say, God expects us to do the impossible, and that is to believe in something that we can't see. And I thought about that for so many years. And I'm always saying that my mother is wrong with everything she says, but she was wrong about that. I mean, it's just, we can see our higher self everywhere. Our hair grows without us even thinking about it. Our fingernails grow without us even having to think about it. Our bodies are wired to heal themselves organically. We get a cut on our arm, and as long as we don't pick at it, guess what happens? It heals itself. It scabs over, and the next thing you know, there's nothing there. And even if there's a little scar, it will probably even disappear if you don't pick at it and pick at it. So you can see your higher self everywhere. That's where creativity comes from. That's where your ideas come from. That's where inspiration comes from. Your excitement, okay? That's your higher self. Your higher self isn't fucking bored. And when somebody tells me that they're bored, I'm like, oh boy. And I really have to taste my words before I say anything. Because when somebody tells me they're bored, it almost pisses me off. And, you know, God, people have really personified God, like capital H-I-M, given God a gender. So let's just say that, you know, I'll just speak about God as people have personified him, H-I-M. I think if there's one thing that pisses him off, is people who sit around bored. Here's another thing my mother said: idle hands are the devil's workshop. Okay, she's right about that. And those words rang in my ears too for so many years. And there's absolute truth in that. And here's why. If you're bored, then that means you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing. Okay? God is a creator. We were made in likeness of God. We're supposed to create. And all of us have this innate divine wisdom within us. And we're supposed to be creating something. And if you are bored, then you're not doing that. And that's what I mean. If you're not doing that, then you are absolutely out of alignment. When people sit around and they're like, okay, well, I'm bored. And it's almost like a label, okay? Boring people, bored people. There's no truth in that. Why in the world would anybody ever be bored if they were doing what they were supposed to be doing? If you're in a job, and even if you're staying active all the time, and I want you to pay close attention to what I'm saying here, because hey, I might piss you off right now. I might ruffle your feathers. I might say some things to you that you don't like or you don't want to hear. But if it causes something to click, then you might have just met one of your greatest teachers. And I say that without ego. I have had so many great teachers, and a great teacher comes along and they have to take you out of your comfort zone, and they have to introduce you to things that you wouldn't typically think about. So you might be thinking, well, I mean, my job my job is boring. It's just boring. You might be thinking that right now. You might feel some resistance to what I'm saying. Your ego might just be boof, firing all over the place. If that's going on and you stay active all the time, you work all the time, okay, you can still be bored if you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing. So if you're and this is an example, if you are working in a job and you're bored, it's because you are making somebody else's dreams come true and not your own. At some point, you chose somebody else instead of yourself. Why would you do that? If you are bored, then you're never going to be satisfied, and you're always going to be looking for happiness or satisfaction outside of yourself, and you're not going to find it. You absolutely are not going to find it. So the second word I'll get into is lonely. Now, many, many years ago, when I first encountered Dr. Wayne Dyer, and if you've read my book, Thought Snob, if you've watched the podcast, if you've watched any of my social media content, you know that Wayne Dyer pretty much gets the credit for bringing me out of the shit show that I was living in. I mean, he's the one that took me from thought slob to thought snob. And a thought slob, just so you know, if you haven't read the book, a slob stands for self-loathing, overrides better. So that means that if you self-loathe, okay, then you are choosing other people over yourself. And that's that's a form of hate, right? So that's what I did, and transitioned over to thought snob. And snob stands for see new objective beliefs. And I've said before, that's just a fancy way of looking at the facts. And the facts were that I was choosing self-loathing over anything better. And when I stopped doing that, well, guess what? I wasn't bored anymore. And I wasn't lonely anymore. Because I was on the right track. I was getting into alignment with who I was really supposed to be. And it doesn't always have to take forever. It did take me a while. So when someone says, well, I get lonely, I'm lonely. All right. I immediately want to go into lecture mode. Like immediately. Wayne Dyer said, you will never be lonely if you enjoy your own company. And when I first heard that, I was like, what in the hell does he mean by that? And a lot of the things he said, I didn't understand at first, and I'd think about it, and I'd think about it, and then one day something would happen, I'd be like, damn it, that's what he meant. He's a genius. When you enjoy your own company, you will never in a million years be alone or feel alone. And I want you to think about something. Why would you ever be afraid to be by yourself? You're the only person you can control. You can't control anybody else. So why would you feel safer or more comfortable in an environment with people that you can't control? But you can control yourself. You can control your emotions. And I know that there people have conditions that throw up an obstacle to controlling their emotions and their thoughts. But for the most part, we have control over that, especially if we're aware. So if you leave this podcast with anything, I want it to be that question: why are you afraid to be by yourself? Because you're the only person you can control. And if you are a person who feels lonely, I used to too. I understand. I'm not shaming and I'm not judging, but being lonely is not a good place to be. And it's also a complete and total mind game, because I don't know about you, for those of you who are watching and listening, but there was a time when I was, popular, and I had 50 people wanting to hang out with me at all times. I'd wake up in the mornings. I swear to God, sometimes you wouldn't believe the missed calls and texts I had on my phone. People knocking at my door. Um, Life of the party, always organizing something, always doing something. I felt very alone. Very, very, very alone. And you will hear a lot of celebrities say that. So it's a mind game. And just because you are around a bunch of people doesn't mean that that's going to keep you from feeling lonely. Okay? So, first two words, bored and lonely. The third word that someone uses that I know for a fact they're out of alignment is can't. That is like a self-fulfilling prophecy. Come on. Like the word can't. You will not hear it come out of my mouth. The only time that I may use that word is when I say, I can't tolerate, boredom, or something of that nature. You're never going to hear me say that I can't afford something. You're never going to hear me say that I can't do something, even if I'm not sure if I can or not. I'm not going to say it, and I'm not going to write it. There is power in our words and there is power in our writing. Don't say that shit. And I go through so much of that in Thought Snob. If somebody, here's an example. If I'm talking to somebody and they are venting to me, and they're venting, let's just say, about their job. I always go to these work examples because there's nothing worse than hating your job and being in a toxic work environment. It sucks. It's a dead end street. It's never going to get you anywhere. But people are so fearful of quitting those jobs. Totally other topic. But if somebody is venting to me and they're complaining about their pay and they're complaining about their roles at work, they can't stand their coworkers, they can't stand their boss. It's everybody's fault. Maybe they're taking some of the blame too, but I will hear all of these problems. And it's my job to be a problem solver. It's just in my soul to do that. I'm immediately going to try and help you fix it. Well, sometimes people don't want to fix their fucking problems. They want to hang on to them. Because fixing problems takes a lot of effort and a lot of change. And people are afraid of change. And the underlying emotion behind boredom, loneliness, using can't, and change is fear. It's all fear. So when somebody's making a bunch of fearful comments to me, I will say, well, have you ever thought about doing this? and I will offer a suggestion. And if immediately they have a rebuttal and it involves, I can't do that, I'm like, all right. And that's usually when I stop. Unless you've paid me to be your coach, I do my best to not overstep boundaries because I have a problem with that, and I never want to be overbearing. But when somebody is complaining about their finances, when money is one of the easiest things in the world to manifest, it really is. That's a whole other topic too, but I go over a lot of that in my book too. And I talk about that on the podcast a lot too. So the word can't. Yeah, you probably can. You probably can. Many years ago, um, I knew someone, and we were just talking, and this person was, I swear I've laughed about this for years. It was so freaking comical. Um, okay, this person was having a hard time. Just I'll sum it up quickly. Having a hard time just getting things done. Like just getting things done. This person lacked motivation, just couldn't do it. And so I said, what do you think the problem is? And they said, well, I'm lazy. And I was like, holy shit. That is not hereditary. That's in your control. I mean, you don't, if you think that you're just that way and you can't do anything about it, because that was the perspective this person was coming from. They said they were lazy, therefore they just really can't do this, they can't do that because they're lazy. I was like, oh my God. So, and I didn't judge them. I made some legitimate observations, and I was just flabbergasted by that comment, and it was funny as hell too. But anyway, if this hits home, if it resonates, if you can relate to it at all, if you're bored, if you're lonely, and if you think you can't do things that you really want to do, then I'm going to tell you how to break that pattern. So what's going on here is you've fallen into a pattern of constantly living in the future. If you're bored, if you're lonely, if you think you can't, then you're living in the future. You're thinking about something that hasn't even damn happened. So you got to do things that put you in the present, okay? You've got to be more in the now. And I'll tell you a great way to do that, and it is so simple. Just do something differently than you usually do. Let's say you get out and you take a walk every day. You like to walk. Or maybe you walk to work, or I don't know, whatever the case may be. But it's something that you do every single day. And every single day you walk the exact same path. If you walk the exact same path every single day, your five senses are going to get a little dull. You're not going to notice your surrounding as much because you know where you're going. You're not going to be present. You're not going to be paying attention. Okay? Like if you walk past the same house every single day and the yard's being mowed at that house, sooner or later, you're not even going to hear the lawnmower. You're not going to smell the grass because you know that that's going on. So you've got to do something to get you out of that pattern. Take a different path. You're going to be forced to pay attention because you're not going to know exactly where you're going. And plus, we're human and new things are going to pop up and you're going to look around and you're going to notice things. Pay attention to what grabs your attention. Pay attention to that. Your five senses will tell you a whole lot. And instead of being bored, and instead of being sitting around feeling lonely, instead of driving people crazy that aren't bored and lonely and are doing things that are in alignment with their higher selves. And instead of thinking that you can't do things, why don't you just try exploring what grabs your attention? Just take a look around and see what your attention is drawn to. Explore that. If there's a famous person or even just somebody you know personally and something about them intrigues you, look into them a little bit, watch them. Maybe read about their life story if it's a celebrity and they have a biography or something. See what catches your attention. Okay? Many years ago, I think this was in like, and I've talked about this before. I think this was in like 2009 maybe or 2010. Um, my husband and I live in Prospect, Kentucky, and back then I lived in my hometown of Richmond, Kentucky, which is about an hour and 45 minutes or something from here. And I drove up here to Prospect. I'd never been to Prospect before, and I had an appointment. Long story short, had an appointment. I was running early as usual. I'm a Capricorn. I'm obsessed with time. So I was running early, and I just took a drive. I just took a drive. I just went driving around. Something was like, maybe you might want to drive around and explore a little bit. I had a nudge to explore. So I went driving around for like 15, 20 minutes. Guess where I drove to? Subdivision I'm living in right now. It's no joke. So pay attention to those nudges. Your higher self is always trying to tell you something if you'll just listen. And I'm going to close out by saying this. People are always talking about karma, but they don't always understand how karma actually works. Karma's not always bad. You know, karma will deliver the good stuff too. But people always use it like there's like a kind of like a negative connotation associated with that word karma. It's like, oh, karma's going to get them. But karma can actually come back around and deliver some incredible rewards. And if you want to get your hands on those and you want karma to work for you instead of against you, then create something. Because anytime you create something, that's an opportunity to be like God. That's it. So when you're bored, when you feel lonely, and when you think that you can't do something, get up and do something.
I absolutely love that. You know, that third word reminds me a lot of the differences in our upbringings. Whereas you were constantly told that as a girl, you weren't ever going to be independent. Women can't make money. You got to find a man to take care of you. I was constantly told anytime I said, I can't do this or I can't do that when I was a child, my mother would say, you need to take that word out of your vocabulary.
And she was right.
Yeah.
She was right. And it wasn't just my parents that heavily influenced me. It was just a socialization of that rural landscape in general. Women were considered to be the weaker sex. Men were perceived as being, you know, the breadwinners, and if the female, you know, brought in more money than he did, well, he must be a big old pussy. And that's just, I mean, that's what was ingrained in my head, and although it never really felt right, I did believe that for a really long time. And my mother is a prime example of somebody who uses "I can't." She never says she's bored or lonely, which lets me know that she has slept on a real huge opportunity to explore herself way more than she has. She doesn't get bored. She doesn't get lonely. And that is a huge sign of strength. But she is a real, I can't. Where my father, you're not going to hear can't come out of his mouth unless he's telling you that you can't. So I think that's noteworthy.
I think this has been a great episode. I hope everybody out there thinks the same. If you do, please subscribe, leave us a comment. If there are any topics that you want to hear Paula talk about, please let us know. The best place to do that's going to be in the YouTube comments. You can also find this podcast anywhere you get your podcasts. We hope to see you again next week. Thanks for joining us.
The Thought Snob Podcast with Paula Swope has been brought to you by Thought Snob Media in association with Special Purpose Studios. All production, mixing, and sound engineering by me, Will Swope. We hope you've enjoyed this podcast. Please take a few seconds to give us 5 stars and leave a review. See you on the next Thought Snob Podcast with Paula Swope.